The next movie we do is The Warriors, and this was a very popular movie when I was growing up, and it has maintained its status as a cult film over time, and there's been a lot of pop culture references to the movie in rap music, and so my students are really excited when they find those references and realize that this movie is where they first generated from. So the first thing I do is I show the students a little PowerPoint on cult films. So we discuss the meaning of cult film, how it is a film that's acquired a highly devoted but specific group of fans, and that sometimes cult movies don't achieve fame outside their fan bases, but there have been exceptions to that. Star Wars, for example. We explain and talk about what makes cult films so exciting to the fans, how they become obsessive, and that sometimes little elaborate subcultures spring up just from a film such as The Warriors. And we talk about how cult films are often known to be eccentric and they don't follow the traditional standards of mainstream cinema. They usually explore topics not considered in any way mainstream. Some of the movies are controversial, and I explained to the students that when The Warriors first came out, there were a lot of fights breaking out in theaters. Some movie theaters refused to show the movie, and try to generate some excitement in the students to figure out why this was. And then I asked them what films would they consider cult films and why. And some of my students have seen Rocky Horror Picture Show, for one, and we banter about movies that are cult films, might be cult films, may become cult films. So after discussing about why and how The Warriors became a cult film, I also give the students little stories about the 70s, because that was when I grew up, and most students are really curious about the 70s. They've seen movies and they think that's a pretty cool time. So I share some personal experience about my life growing up in the 70s. And then the students read John Kenneth Muir's cult movie review, The Warriors, which is on this link that I provided. It's a really interesting review because it breaks down the movie, The Warriors, and it looks at it not only as a reflection of what is going on in the 70s at that time, but it also compares it to a famous Greek battle. Again, I talked to the students about the 70s and how in New York City especially, the metropolitan infrastructure was falling into disrepair and neglect. There was this growing sense of disenfranchisement, a lot of unemployment, a lot of crime, a lot of problems with the police. And the students read all about that in this review. And then we move on to the Battle of Cunaxa, which happened in 401 BC. Also about a leader named Cyrus, and how that band of men was deep inside enemy territory with no ally and had to fight their way out, much like in The Warriors. After the students read the review, and I have them read it on their own, I think it's important that they are able to read something and really work through the text, even though some of the language in this review is outside of their vocabulary, and you know, sometimes they struggle and they have to ask questions a lot through it. This assignment hits many Common Core standards, including being able to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of text, to look at a central idea and its development through the course of the text, to determine the meaning of words and phrases. And so it's a pretty powerful assignment. But it's also an assignment that students really like to do. So the first thing, because there are so many words that the teens may not be familiar with, I asked them to go through and pick out words from the article that they did not know the meaning of, and then they can look them up. And my students, again, they have iPads, so it's easy for them to look up the meaning of words, but they can just use dictionaries as well. And then we discuss those words and share, because one person may know the meaning of a word and another person may not. So we share those out in the class. After that, the next thing the students do is they have a chance to write just a 2 to 3 paragraph summary. I don't do a full essay on this, but they have 3 choices, and it's always good to give students some autonomy in the classroom, and I do that by giving them choices. So the first one is, how does Muir specifically compare the warriors to the Battle of Cunaxa in 401? Then I asked them, I say, Muir states that the Warriors has a historical context based on what was happening in New York City in the mid-1970s, and explain that context in relation to the Warriors. And then finally, number 3, Muir argues that despite its violence and bleak outlook, that the Warriors can be viewed as uplifting and inspiring, and explain how that can be. And I give the students then class time to write this. And here's some student work. You can see some of the words that the students were not familiar with in this particular sample. In the end, in my class this year, most of the students chose to compare the Warriors to the Battle of Cunaxa. That seemed to be the most popular one, and they did an excellent job comparing and contrasting the 2 stories. And they seem to really understand how, things like this can transcend time, and they're able to pull out similarities and differences, which is a really important skill.